So you've probably heard a lot of people saying that a big part of the good video watching experience is actually listening to good audio. If this entire video just sounded like this, you would probably click away from it and not watch anymore, regardless of how good it looks visually and how interesting the topic might seem. That's why even having something as simple as a small microphone positioned just out of frame can make a world of a difference for the audio quality. In this video, we're going to talk about a few things that you can do to get better sounding vocals for your videos, and some of these tips are going to apply to the recording process itself, while others are going to be more about the post-processing side of things. And the best part is, most of these are either going to be completely free, and for the ones that aren't, there are a bunch of different options for how you can use them regardless of what budget you have to work with. This video might end up being a little bit longer than the other ones I've made, so I'll try to have a few chapters down below that you can follow along with. So first up is going to be making sure that you're recording with an external mic and not the microphones that are built into your camera. The microphones that are in your camera should only ever really be like a last resort if you absolutely have to get audio in a situation where for whatever reason you can't use an external microphone. There are a bunch of different types of microphones, but in terms of recording vocals for filmmaking purposes, the two that you're probably most often going to run into are lavalier microphones and shotgun microphones, which are what we're going to be focusing on in this video. I'm just gonna go ahead and assume that you have at least some general idea of what these two types of microphones are, but if you have absolutely no clue, maybe just pause this video for a little bit, go and watch another one kind of explaining what the different types of microphones are and what they're used for, and then come back to this one so that you can understand what we're talking about. The short version is that lavalier microphones are usually meant to go somewhere on your talent, and they're going to be clipped onto a piece of clothing and plugged into like an external recorder or a transmitter that is then transmitting the sound over to a receiver that's plugged into your camera. And shotgun microphones are going to pick up audio in a cone directly in front of them while picking up way less from the sides and the back. Generally speaking, if you're just starting out, I would recommend that you look at getting a decent shotgun microphone first, because they're a lot more versatile in terms of what you can use them for, and then you can think about picking up lavalier microphones down the line if you decide that you need them. So now, assuming that you've already picked up a shotgun microphone, the next thing you should think about is how to position it correctly. You might also want to think about getting yourself a microphone stand as well as an audio extension cable to just make things a little bit easier for yourself. Obviously, if you're just going to be vlogging, things are going to be pretty easy. You just throw it on top of the camera, point it at yourself, and you should be good to go. That being said, if you want to record something like a talking head setup for a YouTube video like this one, or an interview for some sort of project, or a dialogue for a narrative piece, things are going to work a little bit differently. So one of the most common and safest ways to set things up is to have your microphone above you or your talent as close as possible and just out of frame. The reason you want to have it above instead of below is because if the microphone is way too close to your chest, it's gonna pick up a lot more boominess in your voice, making it sound muddy and less clear. The reason this happens is because as your voice is traveling up to your mouth, it's also vibrating your rib cage as well as a bunch of muscle and bone and cartilage in your head. And some of you might be thinking, cool, that's gonna make my voice have a lot more bass and sound a lot deeper. But trust me, unless you're using like a very high quality microphone, all of that bass is something that is not going to sound good, and it's something you want to try to avoid. So now that you have your microphone positioned above you, you want to try and point it straight down at the top of the chest of whoever is speaking. I'm not really sure where I heard this piece of advice, so it might not be 100% correct, but I think it's supposed to help with picking up a little bit more of the low end of the voice without overpowering any of the other frequencies like it would if it was way closer to your chest. Still, even if you just go ahead and point it at the mouth of whoever is speaking, you should be fine. Again, you want to have it as close as possible to you without having it be in your frame, and that's obviously going to depend on what your shot actually looks like. For example, in the case of these YouTube videos, I try to have my microphone around like 30 centimeters, or for those of you using the Imperial system, around 1 foot away from my mouth. I feel like that's pretty much the sweet spot for most situations, and you can probably figure out ways to get it closer if you change up your framing a little bit, but then you're also going to have to worry about dropping your levels either on the microphone itself or in camera to make sure that you don't start peaking. If you get further away, the microphone is going to start picking up a lot more reverb, which is going to make your audio sound worse. Some of the more expensive shotgun microphones might be able to handle recording from like further distances, but generally it's something that you don't want to do unless you have to. So now that your microphone is positioned correctly, the next thing that you have to worry about is the actual environment that you're going to be recording in. Your two biggest enemies are going to be things that make noise, like air conditioners, electronics, and appliances that have fans built into them, or open windows that are letting noise in from the outside, as well as reverb. So if you can, make sure to close all of the doors and windows in your location, as well as turn off anything that doesn't need to be running while you're actually recording. As far as reverb goes, you're often going to run into it because you're just recording in a room that's too empty. If that's the case, there are way too many flat surfaces for the sound of your voice to bounce off of and come back into the sides and the back of your microphone. And even though shotgun microphones are supposed to be pretty good at rejecting audio from anything that's not in front of them, some of it will still get picked up and make your audio sound worse. So a few things that you can do to get rid of some reverb is pick a room to film in that has furniture and curtains and stuff like paintings and shelves on the walls. If your space has concrete or hardwood floors, it might also be a good idea to throw down like a rug or a blanket, because that's also going to help absorb some of the sound coming from your voice, and it's going to stop it from bouncing back up at you. Anything that makes it so you're not in a completely empty room is going to help. And if you're working in a huge open space, it might be a good idea to pick up a few C-stands and hang some sound blankets from them as well. If there's a space that you're planning on filming in a little bit more often, it might be worth it to think about getting it acoustically treated more long term. You might have seen people setting up their home offices and studios with those foam panels that are scattered across the ceiling and the walls, and regardless of what they look like, they're basically all meant to kind of stop sound from bouncing around different surfaces in your space. You could go for something more common like those generic big foam squares that you've probably seen a lot, or some of those heavy-duty sound blankets, but that's not really an aesthetic that everybody would like. So if you want to go for something that kind of looks a little bit more like an art piece and doesn't really draw too much attention and kind of looks like it's just a decoration, you could go for some of those sound panels that are essentially just like wooden frames that have a bunch of foam on the inside and then they're covered with fabric. Another option is having custom sound panels made so that they look like an art piece even more. Generally speaking, you can find different options for all of these in different budget ranges, but from what I know from musician friends of mine, obviously the cheaper ones are going to be a little bit worse than the more expensive ones. That said, even the cheaper options are going to be a lot better than having nothing at all. And if you want to try to save yourself some money, you could look into creating one of those sound panels as like a DIY project by yourself. There's tons of guides and tutorials out there on the internet, so that's definitely an option as well. The next piece of advice is something that almost no one thinks about, but it can also be really important as well, and that's actually preparing your voice itself for recording. Anytime I'm recording these YouTube videos, I'll have a water bottle somewhere nearby and I'll take a few sips in between takes so that I can make sure that my throat and my mouth aren't getting way too dry. And I also try to remember to blow my nose before hitting record. If your nose is stuffed up, that's obviously going to make your voice sound a lot more nasally, which just isn't great. Also, try to remember to breathe normally as if you're just talking to someone you know, because a lot of people will get flustered and kind of feel like they have to say everything they have to say in just one breath. So if you need to take a break, just do it and then go again. So if you followed all of those steps so far, you should now be able to record at least decent sounding vocals for your videos. But that being said, there are a few more things that you can do in terms of post-production to clean up that last little bit. And I just want to quickly mention, I'm not like a professional certified audio engineer or anything, so take everything I say with a grain of salt. This is just what works for me, but it might not be the absolute best and most correct way to do things. If you're using Resolve, something that can help a lot with removing unwanted noise and reverb is the voice isolation. I've been using this on pretty much every one of my videos since it was added into Resolve, and I've been getting great results from it. I think Final Cut has something similar, and I believe Premiere Pro introduced an equivalent feature to this as well. Usually, I'll apply this directly to the audio track itself instead of each individual audio clip. I'll have it somewhere around the range of 60 to 70 because that gives me the best results for the setup that I'm working with, but you don't want to turn it up to 100 because it's going to end up making your voice sound very overprocessed and unnatural. Honestly, you're going to have to play around with it and see what works best for you. Depending on your setup, you might find that something a little lower or a little higher works better. So this is what the audio for this video would sound like without absolutely any effects applied. and this is what it sounds like with just voice isolation. As you can probably tell, without any effects applied, you can hear the fan of the light that's next to me, as well as a lot more reverb. The next thing I usually do is I go into the Fairlight tab, and under the mixer on the side, I'll scroll down and double click on the EQ tab for the audio track that has my vocals. Now that this is open, I make sure to add a high pass filter at around 80 to 100 Hz and a low pass filter at around 16,000 Hz. The high pass filter takes out the very low frequencies from my recording, which are usually just rumble that adds nothing to the overall quality of the vocals, and the low pass takes out the very high frequencies that are just background noise and not part of the voice at all. Next, I make sure that the Q factor for each of these settings is set at around 2. That way, any of the changes that we make are going to be a lot smoother and make things sound more natural. From there, what I'll do is I grab the third point and drag it up to increase the volume just a little bit, and then I move it around until I start hearing the frequencies of my voice that sound unpleasant. It's kind of hard to explain what you should be listening for, but when you hear it, you'll know it. This is what the audio would sound like without any of those changes applied. This is what the audio would sound like without any of those changes applied. This is what the audio would sound like without any of those changes applied. So that right there is kind of what I'm looking for, and it sounds a little bit bad. Then when I find these frequencies, I'll lower the volume for that point to make some of them quieter. I'll do the same thing for the fourth point. You might be able to hear that it kind of sounds like I'm talking into a cardboard box when I bring up the volume on this point. This is what the audio would sound like without any of those changes applied. This is what the audio would sound like without any of those changes applied. That's why I want to make these frequencies just a little quieter. And lastly, I'll take the fifth point, which is towards the higher end of the frequencies, and actually bring this one up a little bit. This adds some more clarity to the higher frequencies of the voice, making it sound just a little nicer and more natural. So once I've done all of that, this is what the audio would sound like without any of those changes applied. And this is what it sounds like with them. I don't know about you, but I personally think that having these effects applied makes the audio sound a lot better. If you're going to be recording in the same environment often, you can save all of these as a preset from the button in the top left and save yourself the time whenever you have to use them again. Finally, I double click on the dynamics in the mixer panel, and under the compression and limiter, I'll use these settings. I'm not gonna lie to you, I basically use all of these settings because I saw them a while back from a Potato Jet video where he brought on a friend of his who's a professional in the audio space. They've been working great for me, and I've just saved them as a preset that I use all the time. I will have Potato Jet's video linked below so that you can go and watch it after this one if you're interested in learning more about processing vocals from someone that knows a lot more than I do. So that's all I have for you in this one. Hopefully you found it interesting and you were able to learn something new. Again, I just want to make it very clear that I'm not someone who works with audio professionally. It's just part of what I have to do for my filmmaking work as well as these YouTube videos, and all of these tips are things that I've kind of figured out work pretty well for my needs. So if you're someone who knows a lot more about working with audio, I would be really happy if you could drop me a comment below letting me know how I could do certain things better and more efficiently, because I'm always open to learning new things, and I also think that it would be really useful to other people reading the comments as well. As always, if you made it this far into the video, I just want to thank you because it genuinely means a lot. Consider sticking around by subscribing, and I'll see you in the next one.